Welcome back. I'm Teacher David. We will continue with our video lesson, Shooting for the Star. So far, we have finished covering the solar system and planets, and a brief history of rocketry. Today, we will dive into rocket science and engineering. Before we get to our next lesson, which is build and test rocket, we need to know some basics about the rocket. What type of rockets are there? How does a rocket engine works? Let's find out. By now, you know the drill. Here is the vocabulary list for this lesson. Same as the previous, there are some difficult words that you need to know and understand before we begin. Make sure you spend some time and go through them first. And as always, you can scan the QR code to download and print out a worksheet to help you out. Now, let's say the word out loud together. Please repeat after me. Aerodynamic. Aerodynamic. Chamber. Chamber. Combustion. Combustion. Essential. Essential. Exhaust. Exhaust. Friction. Friction. Force. Force. Fuel. Fuel. Hollow. Hollow. Opposite. Opposite. Pierce. Pierce. Propellant. Propellant. Thrust. Thrust. Excellent. Have you ever heard the saying, it's not rocket science? It means that something isn't complicated. But you know, the funny thing is that the rocket science might be simpler than you thought. The very basic form of a rocket is a chamber held the gas under pressure and a small opening at one of the ends letting the gas escape. So the object is pushed in the opposite directions. Let me show you an example. Blow up a balloon filled with air inside. The balloon is compressed the air inside while the air inside is pushing back. This creates a balance force. That's called equilibrium. Now, what would happen if you let the opening go? The air will escape through the opening and the balloon is pushed in the opposite direction, which sends the balloon flying around the room. Whoa! This is kind of how rocket works. The basis of rocket science is Sir Isaac Newton's law of motion. The laws of motion have three laws. The first law says that object at rest will stay at rest and object in motion will stay in motion in a straight line unless acted upon by the unbalanced force. And this first law of motion is also known as inertia. Let me tell you another example. If you were to go to a supermarket and saw a shopping cart, it will stay in one place if nothing touches it, right? If someone comes along and pushes it, it will keep on moving in a straight line unless somebody stops it or changes course. The second law of motion says, force is equal to mass times acceleration. There's a math equation for this, and that is F is equal to m multiplied by a. Let me explain again. Let's say we have two shopping carts this time. One is empty, the other one is full of food. If you want to push both cars in the same direction at the same speed, the shopping cart that is full of food will need more force since its mass is greater than the empty one. Last, we have the third law of motion. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reactions. Let's use the shopping cart for our example again. If you are sitting in the shopping cart this time with a really long stick and you push the stick into the ground and away from you, what do you think is going to happen to you and the shopping cart? Yep, that's right. You and the shopping cart will go in the opposite directions, right? So, according to Newton's first law of motions, the weight of the rocket with the gravity pull of the Earth, the rocket is pulled toward the center of the Earth. We need to have an unbalanced force to change that. For the rocket to lift off, the rocket engine must create enough actions or thrust to make the rocket change its directions. Other than the rocket's mass and Earth's gravity, when the rocket is moving through the air, which causes friction, also known as drag, the air is slowing the rocket down. Therefore, more thrust is even needed to push away the air. However, once the rocket is in space, without air, there's little or no gravity pull from the Earth. We no longer need that much thrust to change directions. Just a tiny little bit of thrust, and that will do the job. Every space rockets are designed and built for specific missions, but they all have a few essential parts that they are the same. These are the nose cone, fuselage, the fins, and the nozzle. Let's start with the nose cone. The nose cone is on the top of the rocket near the payload area. It is used to piercing through the air with its aerodynamic shape. The fuselage is the main body of the rocket. This is where fuel is stored. It takes a lot of power for a rocket to fly up into the space, so it needs a lot of space to keep the fuel. The fins and the nozzle keeps the rocket stable during the flight and use them to control the directions as well. Without them, the rocket will be flying all over the place and instead of flying straight. Now, let's move on to the engine part of the rocket. The rocket engine is just like many other engines. It needs to create thrust by burning fuel. Vehicles' engine, for such as cars or airplanes, needs to draw oxygen into their engine to work. The rocket engine is different because there's no oxygen in outer space. So, the rocket engine needs to carry everything it needs with it. The rocket engine burns fuel and oxygen that it carries and turn them into hot gas and then push back out of the engine, and that moves the rocket forward. There are two types of rocket engines: liquid propellant and solid propellant. Let's start with the easiest type, the solid propellant engine. Most of the solid propellant rockets have hollow center. The reason why the most solid propellant rockets have hollow center is that this type of engine, only the surface of the propellant burns. Therefore, the hollow core has more surface for burning. And some might even have a star-shaped core to create even more thrust. The other type of rocket engine is liquid propellant. This is a much more complicated engine. The liquid engine needs to separate storage for fuel and the oxidizer. Plus, it needs pumps to deliver them both to the combustion chamber, where they are mixed and burned for thrust. The fuel of a liquid propellant engine is usually kerosene or liquid hydrogen. As for oxidizer, it's usually liquid oxygen. Let's compare the two and see what are the differences. On the outside, both rocket types look very similar. Both have the nose cone, area for payload, fuselage, and fins. Inside the rockets, both engine types have a combustion chamber and a nozzle. Solid engine have a hollow core surrounded by the propellant gland for fuel. Liquid engine have separate storages for fuel and oxidizer. Both are sent by pumps into the combustion chambers for burning. And because of those extra parts that it needs to store the fuel, they are much heavier than the solid engine. One way to reduce the weight of the liquid engine is to make the exit cone of the nozzle out of a very light metal. However, with extreme hot and fast gas passing through the nozzle cone, it will quickly melt the light-weighted metals. Therefore, a cooling system is needed. The solid engines are not as easy to control as the liquid engines. Once they start, the propellant burns until they are gone. They are very difficult to stop or slow down, and that goes for the rate of burning as well. No matter what type of engines a rocket uses, when designing and building the rocket, some things need to be considered. Just like everything else, regardless of the size, the mass, or the shape, has a point inside called the center of mass. The center of mass is the exact spot where all the mass of the object is perfectly balanced. For example, if you have a ruler, try to balance it with just one finger. The exact spot on the ruler that allows you to balance it is the center of the mass. The center of mass is important for a rocket is because at this point is where it keeps the rocket balanced and flying stably. An unbalanced rocket will tumble and crash. Other than the center of mass, there is another important center point called center of pressure that will affect how a rocket flies. The center of pressure only happens when the air is floating past the moving rocket. The airflow through the rocket will rub and push against the surface of the rocket, and it can move the rocket around. Let me give you an example. Think of a weather vane. It is used to point towards where the wind is coming from. There is a point on the surface of both sides of the weather vane, that is the center of pressure. If the center of pressure is the same spot as the center of mass, the weather vane will not be able to point towards where the wind is coming from. The center of pressure on a rocket must be somewhere towards the tail, and the center of mass must be somewhere towards the nose. If they are too close to each other, the rocket will be unstable during flight. In any flight, whether it's airplane or rocket, they all move around along the three axes called roll, pitch, and yaw. For space rocket flight, the pitch and the yaw axes are the most important because any changes in those two will set the rocket off its course. So how do rockets change course during a flight? There are two systems are used to help the rocket change its flight path. One is by using movable fins. The fins will change the airflow and make the rocket change course by tilting the fin when it needed. These fins are controlled by computers and sensors. The other method is by movable nozzle. By tilting the engine nozzle, the rocket will change its direction of the force away from its center of mass, and therefore adjust its flight path. And remember, once the rocket is in outer space, there's no air. Without air, the movable fins will no longer work. However, rockets can only change its course by spinning along the roll axis or by using small engine exhaust surrounded the rocket to change directions. That is it. That's the basic science and engineering behind how rocket works. That's not too difficult, isn't it? Again, each space rocket is designed and built with a specific mission in mind. As our technology advances, so will our rockets, allowing us humans to explore further and faster into the unknown. Hopefully, this video lesson has inspired and interested you to find out more information. Feel free to watch this video again and do some research on your own. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.